Welcome Wargamers, Doug here from 2+ Stuff, and today a huge thing dropped from Bellum Games, makers of the game Conquest that I have been thoroughly enjoying, and that is their second edition. What we're going to do in this video is go through the changes. There are really a lot of streamlining and word changes. There are some important differences between the first and second edition. We'll get to those, but realistically this is meant to be an introduction video for folks who have been kind of on the fence about learning more about Conquest. This is a wonderful time to jump in. For those of you who are already hooked on my Conquest stuff, we're going even deeper in 2023 because I am very excited about this. And so in this video, what we're going to do is go through the changes. They have kind of like a, too long didn't read kind of synopsis. I'm just going to give you the play-by-play from there, as well as link all the different relevant articles down below. What I'll say in short is that Bellum is looking to make the most streamlined and, not streamlined, but just accessible, I think is probably the better word, rank and flank game out there. Things that blow, in my opinion, Kings of War, Warhammer Fantasy Battles out of the water, and I'm here for it. And so what we're going to do now is go over to the Bellum site and just kind of look through their little synopsis of the rules changes. Now, keep in mind, what we're going to cover today is the core rules of the system. The actual army lists will be printed on Wednesday, and I will have a whole series of videos I plan to do going faction by faction, talking about the various units, what you can expect them to do. So if you're interested in that, please come back then. So here we are on the announcement page. As I said, I'm going to have a link to this in the description down below if you want to read it for yourself. And of course, the actual rulebook is available on their main site. So to give you a high-level view, essentially what they're trying to do is change the wording of the game to become much more clear, succinct. If you've been around with Age of Sigmar a long time, they've really grown at Games Workshop in terms of developing their language set, how they articulate rules. Literally the language that is repeated across multiple, war scroll entries and army list all has to be succinct so that everyone's on the same page. That's essentially what a lot of the things in second edition did, but there are a few big uns. We're going to cover the big uns. So I'm going to read here. I'm just going to read because some folks like to drive and listen. Conquest, the Last Argument of Kings version 2.0 is here, and it's packed with new features and improvements that will take your tabletop experience to the next level. From streamlined features and improved mechanics, this update is sure to help both new players and veterans alike. I just went to a tournament on Saturday, and we were reviewing the entire thing through the lens of how will this be different in 2.0, immensely and very helpfully. In this post, we'll take a closer look at some of the main changes coming in the 2.0 update. So without further ado, let's dive in. So their first section here, system-wide. I'm going to go section by section, by the way. This update sees the integration of our FAQ and errata into the core rules. Pretty simple. Although a big part of the text has been updated, it is the way rules are explained that has changed, not how the game is played. Now, this was explained to me from the team, the creator team, because I was on the testing for 2.0, as that's exactly how they want you to say it. The idea here is that the actual fundamental game hasn't changed. List building hasn't really changed dramatically. The way that you deploy your troops, all that kind of stuff, command cards, none of that has changed. But the language that the rulebook uses to articulate what's happening has. And it's done that to match the models that you see on the table to make it much, much clearer. There's some readjustments of points because they did change the way certain things like shooting, for example, is a big one that changed, and so the points reflected that. Previously common used undefined terms are now properly defined. That is very helpful in a system-wide revisit of wording, examples, diagrams, and explanations. So at the top level, it just makes sense. They're just cleaning it up, and the idea is if you are someone giving a demo, the game doesn't change. The actual rules language, when you get to that next tier of trying to get great at the game, that is what has become more succinct. Infantry Stands is the next section. Infantry Stands now operate much like their brute, cavalry, and monster counterpart in that their characteristics are no longer calculated on a model per model basis, but on a stand basis. This allows an incredible amount of design space to open up, as characteristics like attacks and wounds no longer have to be adjusted in increments of 4, while now able to have a stand with 5 attacks or 6 wounds rather than increments of 4 or 8. Now, I have a lot of thoughts on this. Let's go through their bullet points and then we'll round up my discussion. Individual models are no longer removed. I have glued all of my Dweg home down. They are a Last Argument of King's army. Instead, the whole stand is removed when it loses all of its wounds. This allows us to redesign regiments to make them feel close closer to the lore, 4 men-at-arms do not withstand as much punishment as 4 Wadroon blooded. Exactly, they're trying to add variations in toughness and strength and all that kind of stuff that's not necessarily tied to special rules or keywords. Stands are no longer restored with a single wound. You must be able to heal at least half of a regiment's wounds, rounding up with a single healing effect before you are capable of restoring a stand. That works for infantry as well as cavalry. So that one here, there's a little bit of fun wording when it says the regiments. So basically what it's saying is if I have a stand, let's say hold warriors, I'm going to make an example. Please don't go with this because it's not the real rules. So if I have a stand of hold warriors that have 4 wounds each and it gets killed, all 4 dudes are dead. If I want to heal that stand, I have to at least be able to heal 2 wounds of it to bring it back. That applies to everything. And it is rounding upward, so for those 5 wound things, you're going to need 3. Rules like Fury now simply give +1 attack until the end of the round. That's just basically the way it worked before was the front row of stands in combat would get +1, but now since all the stands are functionally acting as the regiment, it doesn't really matter. They just give you +1. And it helps further balance infantry. Now, this is an important subject we're going to touch on here. I'm going to hover on infantry stands for just a bit. It's very interesting the way that Bellum has gone about this. I love this change. Okay, what this means is stands, a collection of 4 infantry guys, fight at their maximum amount of efficiency until they're dead. It makes kind of, I guess, relying on how long a unit can last in combat much more reliable, and I like that. Saturday, when I was at my tournament, which I will talk about in a separate video, I was basically using a D8 to keep track of all the wounds that I was suffering, and I had no problem with it. It was totally fine. It made perfect sense. I think at any given time, I maybe had 3 stands that had a wound on them max. So like, nothing outlandish or crazy. I will say here though, because I did ask for clarification from the Bellum Discord, from the word from on high. What does this mean for modeling these regiments? Do I need to have all 4 models on there? Their answer very clearly was, if you want to go to official events and be able to compete for prizes and stuff, you have to have all 4 infantry models on the stand. For unofficial events, I'm sure you can do diorama things. I'm certainly going to make a few diorama pieces that I would only take to local events and no one's going to care, but Bellum, for their official stuff, they still want you to use all 4 models. I'm really excited to see how much they lean into this freedom when it comes to, being able to adjust things. If you're not familiar, it used to be the entries, war scrolls for lack of a better term, were written on a model by model basis. So yes, even though a regiment comes with 3 stands of 4 guys, 12 dudes total, the actual profile for the unit still had everything listed by a single guy. So you would have 1 attack for times 4 guys per stand, you get 4 attacks. That's what they're trying to alter and change. Now those 4 guys can represent any number of attacks or wounds, which opens a lot of design space for them. So that's a big change. Mostly when it comes to modeling, gameplay wise, things don't change a whole lot. But let's start talking about actual nitty-gritty changes to the rules that I think are very important. The first one here is impact attacks. If you are familiar with Conquest currently, or I should say the last edition now, impact attacks were derived from how many attacks your guys normally make. You divide that in half, and that's how many impact attacks you get to hit. It was sort of like an extra, splash of attacks rather than meaning to be a full thing. Well, then they kept adding so many regiments that had impact attacks, but representing different things. So impact could also be horses charging into a unit. It could also be the Nords can use throwing axes, and the idea is they're throwing the axes at their enemies as they charge in. So it began to represent a lot of different things. So what they did was essentially took that away from the core rules and made it a universal special rule. Now it is impact. Impact attacks are no longer derived from the attack characteristic of a regiment, and it's no longer implied by the type and class of regiment, which was confusing, by the way. A regiment now simply has the Impact X special rule stating exactly how many impact attacks it inflicts. So things like throwing weapons, unstoppable charge, all of that stuff's gone. Those are all modifiers and special rules that change the way impact works. Well, because we pulled it out of the universal special rules, all those, since we pulled it out of the main rules, all those universal special rules kind of go with it. Support and impact interactions are much clearer now. Support works the same way. It's support X, so whatever the number is, that's how many attacks your second and third ranks can contribute. Rules like speed of horse are much simpler to understand, and that one, I'd never had a chance to use speed of horse, but it just has to do with impact attacks. This is a big one because of the way impact attacks were calculated before, because it used to be half your attack value, which makes sense, but then there were some rules that let you double the number of impact attacks. So then it would be divide your attacks by 2 and then times that number by 2, which would ironically sometimes give you more impact attacks than you had actual attack. It doesn't make any sense. It's over now. Like 4 times yesterday I heard conversations going, that doesn't make any sense. And then me and another Vanguard were like, yep, give it a day. So this is a huge quality of life improvement because the function of impact attacks has changed since the game launched, so I'm glad that this reflects that. The next one here is volley actions, another big one, and quite a contentious one, so please give me your feedback and certainly give it to Parabellum. So Barrage X is what they've always used for determining how many shots you get. If it's Barrage 2, each stand fires 2 shots. That's basically how it works now. You no longer have your shots when you fire at over half range. So right now, if I have a unit of, say, crossbowmen that shoot 20 inches, if I shoot from 10.1 inches to 20 inches, they would fire half their shots. It's kind of like a obscuring because of long distance. That's gone now, which is a colossal change to the way and the efficacy, I should say, of shooting. Instead, now you gain +1 barrage if you're within effective range. Effective means 0 to not 0, but 0.01 inch to your half range of your weapon. So in our example, it would be firing an extra shot within 10 inches. So there's no penalties to firing long range. They just incentivize you to get up close. To compensate for this, Barrage X values yield slightly less shots in total to account for all of that. You know what I mean? Like the units can't fire like they used to because that was built around the premise that generally speaking most units are going to fire beyond their halfway range just by the nature of what they do and they don't want to get into combat. So that's all gone. Shots have been restructured. More details will come on Wednesday. This last little note here, complete restructure of how line of sight is explained. The end result is the same, only much cleaner and easier to understand. But that is a colossal change. Now the reason is mainly because just like Age of Sigmar, Conquest is set in a fantasy universe where guns are not prevalent. They don't have black powder. Okay, they've stated that multiple times. They don't want it to be a shooting game. But this is an obvious buff to shooters. Units like Bowchosen are going to just really shine in this meta. I think they're going to need some major debuffs in the future. Nord players, enjoy it while you got it. Certainly you 2 Spire players with all of your Vanguard clone, infiltrators. Like there's some great shooting units in this game, and they just got a whole lot tastier. And the last section here is command models. Command upgrades are now renamed to officers for consistency. This is a thing that exists in First Blood as well. Unit attachments that add special abilities are just called officers in that game. They just moved it over because it makes sense. Each regiment now has a dedicated command stand, meaning one of those, stands that you have that has 4 dudes on it just has to represent the leadership, where you have like your leader, your standard bearer, all the officers are on there. It explains proper placement on where that has to go. Basically, they just always want to be in the center, leading everyone in the charge. Center front, I should say. And they also expanded their design space for new and unique officer abilities. So the way that army rules have moved around a little bit, I can give you a kind of a sneak peek-ish, is just that some of the special rules that are given from artifacts are kind of offloaded to officers just to make them more accessible for players. That one is one you're just going to have to look at your army list and find out. But they kind of moved things around to make officers meaningful enhancements to a regiment, while also clarifying where they fit literally in terms of like physical model placement with the unit. Now I did accidentally skip ahead and I saw there's actually 2 more sections. They just weren't bolded as well as the other ones are. So magic is a big change. Magic is a bit suffocating, or it's either non-existent or suffocating. There's not really much in between, but this is where a lot of big changes happen. Each spell now requires 2 successes to be cast, which is a big change. That is a stark one for any priest or wizard level that's below like 5. It gets a lot harder to do stuff. Scaling levels, meaning if you're not familiar with how magic works in Conquest, some spells are harder to cast on bigger units, meaning like a fireball hits 1 dude, but a flame wall can hit multiple ranks of guys as it pours over them. That kind of stuff. It's all been readjusted. The explanations are stronger, I think. Spellcasters are no longer required to purchase spells. Instead, they know every spell available to them. The only exception being character stands with access to schools of magic that have to pick one. So, for example, my Dweghome Tempered Sorcerer, he has access to 3 schools of fire. 3 schools of magic. There's fire, magma, and earth, I think. I never take anything but fire because I throw my guy on a Helldrake and he's just like, flame on! And he just loves it. But all magic is free. For example, if you were to pick up one of the shamans from Nords. He knows every single spell in his little tree. What this does to me is make spellcasting much more of a utility thing. You want them to be able to apply buffs, and they simply just made it easier to do that because the second you take one, you get access to everything. They are a toolbox in and of themselves. There was a across-the-board adjustment of spell attunement levels. Basically, what is the target number you're trying to roll? Now that you need 2 successes, those numbers change depending on how much they want you to successfully cast the spell, or how, consistent they want those spells to be. And spells now last until the end of the round, unless mentioned otherwise. This can be big because there were some effects that expired a little bit too early for my taste, or some that didn't go away fast enough, like Aura of Death and stuff like that. It wouldn't go away at the end of the round, and all of a sudden you got an Aura of Death 4 thing in your face. And their last section here, I know I said that before, is special rules and draw events. This is just kind of a little bit of housekeeping here. Faction-specific rules are moved to their respective army lists. So if there was a rule in the rulebook that like only Dweghome players used, then that was just moved to the Dweghome book. So it kind of just reorganized a bit, kind of cut things down, trimmed the fat, I think is probably a good wording for it. Certain rules are removed as they are no longer needed, given the mechanics, things like throwing weapons, all that kind of stuff. Again, trimming fat. And certain rules were removed and will return as faction-specific ones in the future. So some rules are gone, but maybe them city-states will have them. And of course, here you can see the new 2-player starter set that they are introducing with this edition. And this is where I really want to highlight. This is all 2nd edition stuff. You get 2.0 rulebooks. You get everything you need to start playing Nords and city-states. The one thing that I will give away, because I hadn't seen Parabellum talk about it, but I think it's important if you're going to spend money on this, this is a functional warband for each side. Regardless of what the rules say right now, these are each functional warbands. Whatever questions you have, because there's a few questions about this particular hero for the Nord side. There are a few stipulations that exist for him now that don't exist in the future. Understand, if you buy this set, you have 2 awesome starts to your collection. That's all I'm going to say. I just think it's dumb that they're not being a little bit more proactive with announcing that. There's a link down here where you can get the new rules, and it says keep an eye out for our army list coming this Wednesday. On Wednesday, I am going to have a Recordapalooza, and I'm basically hoping to have, starting Wednesday, just going on from there, at least some recap of each faction. There's 7 in total now. What is there? 100 Kingdoms, Spires, Wadroon, Old Dominion, Nords, Dweghome, and City-States will be releasing, I assume at the same time, since they're part of 2nd edition. That might not be true, but that's my assumption. And basically, I just want to go through, read through every single unit that exists for those, talk about not necessarily the changes. I'm not going to compare 1st edition to 2nd edition. I don't care about what was. I'm just going to go through and see what you can expect from these various regiments as you're building your collection. All in all, I think it's shaping up to be a fantastic edition. I'm going to be participating in the Conquest tournament over at Adepticon. I'm very excited for that. I think it's an incredible game system. It certainly has all of my hobby attention right now because I'm just getting so much fun out of it. The community is awesome and just, it's great. If you want to jump into Conquest with me, I am going to be doing a slow grow league for a new army in 2023. I'm doing the Nords, which is the Viking half of the starter set that I showed earlier. And I'm going to be doing milestones. I'm going to give myself a little time to work ahead because the last time I tried to do that for First Blood, I fell behind after some family tragedy, and I just never quite recovered. But I don't want it to happen again, so I'm going to work ahead. This way I have a little bit of wiggle room. And if you'd like to join along with that, I do have a discount code in the description down below to save you 10% on all your purchases, flat, no matter what you're buying. Every single time you use that link, it goes a long way to supporting me, lets me know as a content creator that you're excited about Conquest stuff, so please go ahead and use that link. As far as like my overall thoughts, I have read the rule book. I mean, I've been reading it for a little while now because the rules were kind of set in stone before the army lists went to testing. Makes sense. I can't be tuning both separately at the same time. I like the rules. I think the move to stands was terrific. The fiddliness of trying to take off and put on models is such a pain that the minute I was able to glue down my Dweghome, I instantly had so much more fun because it's easier to now transport the army, put it on the table, and pick it up. Think about that for a second. If you go to a game store, right, and you want to play Conquest, before you had to like bust out all your little stands, and then you had to have all your characters painted, put them on, and then hopefully, I guess, magnetize them so they don't immediately fall off the second that you start moving them, which they did anyway. I had mine magnetized for a while. Now I'm physically moving because now everything's glued down to the stand. I mean, there's maybe 20 something actual stands or whatever that I'm moving around. Like, it just simplifies things from a transportation, storage, and deployment, meaning taking your models to the store. I love it. I think the one that has to be watched the most is the changes to shooting. In theory, I really like them. I think it's a great design idea to say, instead of punishing players, we'll just reward them for doing what we want, meaning you don't lose shots for firing at long range. You just get incentivized to try and shoot at closer range, which I'm cool with. That being said, there are some incredible guns in this game that are tempered a lot by their ranges. So, and all of those things were adjusted, of course. Like, they did go in and adjust the ranges of just about every ranged unit I can think of, with the exception of 8-inch ranged weapons. I don't think those changed terribly, but there are some nasty ones. So I think I don't want this to become a shooting game. I have no reason to think at this point it will, with the exception of bow chosen in Nords. I think those are a devastatingly good and easy to get regimen. But beyond that, I mean, not much else. Because, I mean, the real gross ones that I have access to, like the Hellbringer Drake with its big old cannons and the Fire Forged, they already had strong arm as a universal special rule. Like, they didn't lose shots to range anyway. So I didn't notice a difference there, but it will show up for a lot of things like militia bowmen, crossbowmen, cologne infiltrators, whatever, for spires. I don't know. There's a lot. Anyway, friends, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I'm so excited to cover Conquest. You guys have no idea. This has been such a refreshing, I don't know, bit of hobby invigoration for me. So I hope that you're as excited as I am. Hope to hear from you, and I'll catch you next time. Happy Wargaming.